Okay, everyone, keep filtering in. We're going to get this kicked off. This is our last presentation here from the technical track today. This is going to be a fun one. So we've got Samy Kamkar here to visit us. Samy is best known for the Samy worm, the first cross-site scripting worm infecting over 1 million users on MySpace in less than 24 hours. By the way, congratulations. A co-founder of Phonality Incorporated, an IP PBX company, Samy previously led the development of all top-level domain name server software and systems for Global Domains International. In the past 10 years, Samy has focused on evolutionary and genetic algorithmic software development, voice-over IP software development, automated security and vulnerability research in network security, and reverse engineering and network gaming. There's a lot of big words in there. So with that, take it away.
Okay, can everyone hear me back there? All right, great. Thanks everyone for coming. Today I'm going to talk about how I met your girlfriend. I'm going to talk about some pretty cool new web attacks that we're going to look at and some sort of new classes of web attacks. So thanks for introducing me. Just a little bit more. Again, I'm an independent security researcher. I do this for fun. I just think security is awesome, and there's so much cool stuff you can do. I don't do it professionally, at least not yet. I did create the MySpace worm from a few years ago. I recently created something called EverCookies, extremely persistent cookies. Sorry about that. I did co-found the company Phonality, if you're familiar with Trixbox or other voice-over IP systems. And, well, I love Lady Gaga. She's awesome. So you're probably like, yeah, you know, maybe I heard about you a couple of years ago, you know, with the whole MySpace worm, but I haven't really heard of you since then. You know, what happened? Well, the government didn't let me touch computers. One day, about 6 months after the MySpace worm, the Secret Service came to my home. They raided me. They went through everything. They took my computer. They took my cell phone. Anything with data, CDs, DVDs, everything. They just took it away. And worst of all, they took away my iPod. It's pretty bad. After that, they said you can't touch computers. In fact, they tried to get that restriction for the rest of my life. I also had over 700 hours of community service, which was nice to really give back. You know, picking up trash off the side of the road in Los Angeles. That was fun. A little bit of restitution, as well as 3 years of probation, which is like AOL in real life. Fortunately, I got it all removed recently, so I'm back on computers. All my restrictions are gone, back to normal. So hopefully I can tell you guys about some pretty cool stuff. So what are we looking at? You know, why are we looking at the web? Obviously, this is an OAuth conference, so we want to talk about the web. But I like to do stuff that I think is fun. So why am I looking at the web? I mean, it's all the same stuff typically, right? There's XSS, there's SQL injection, CSRF. What are some new attacks that we can do? Well, I like the web for a couple of reasons. One of them is that we have these browsers, which are extremely powerful. I like to think of them as a code distribution channel. So what do I mean by that? Well, 5, 10 years ago, how did you get code to somebody else? You'd need to write it to a disk, put an ad on top of it that says 1,000 free hours of AOL, and send it to someone. You need to mail it. And that's how you'd get somebody else to execute your code on their system. Today, we have essentially a web browser on virtually every system out there. Even your phone. Your phone typically has a very powerful web browser, probably capable of executing things even like HTML5 and JavaScript. So today, if you want somebody else to execute code on their local system, all you have to do is put up a web page, get them to hit that URL somehow, and that's it. They're executing code locally. And we usually don't think of it like that, right? We think, oh, they're just rendering some HTML and CSS. But no, they're actually executing code on their system that somebody else wrote without any authentication or verification there. So I think that's really, really cool. Another thing is browsers are really powerful. Although they communicate in HTTP, they communicate in other protocols like HTTPS and FTP. And there are ways that we can abuse that. All right, so what are we going to talk about? Well, typically, as I'm browsing the web, often I'm finding myself in trouble on social networks. So I'm browsing Facebook, and I'm thinking, I'm just looking around until I stumble upon this profile, Anna Faris, a well-known American actress here. She's done, you know, really top-notch movies like Scary Movie, if you're familiar with that. She loves application security, which I think is awesome. And she appears to be some sort of fruit model in this picture. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm thinking, you know, this is the type of girl I want to get to know. So how can I communicate with her? Well, Facebook has this awesome feature, send a message, right? So I'll send Anna a message. So I'm about to click, but you know what? The respectable thing to do would be to see if she's in a relationship. So Facebook has this great thing, and they tell you if she's in a relationship. So I check. She's not single. It's not complicated. She's in a relationship. All right, so who is this guy? So I look him up, do some research. All right, so he's a CISSP, founded this CEO of this company, Sec Theory, authored a couple of cool books, co-developed clickjacking with Jeremiah Grossman, which is a really cool technology. If you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. Certified application security specialist, I think we all agree with that. A man who requires no introduction, Robert R. Snake Hansen. I hope you got to see his talk just moments ago with Josh. So here's the problem. I'm dealing with this guy, right? This is the boyfriend. Now, normally what I would do in a situation like this is I would just, I don't know, break into his account or something like that. Because obviously I want to meet Anna. So the question becomes, how do I systematically destroy the relationship? As I'm sure all of you are thinking. What I would normally do is, let's say, break into his Facebook account. Maybe I can do something like a XSS on Facebook and get him to run it and then acquire his cookie, right? Log in as him and then do whatever I want. Well, that's going to be tough, right? We're dealing with someone very, very smart. He understands technology very well. He understands security very well. He's not going to be susceptible to the same types of attacks that, let's say, a regular internet user would. Okay, so how do I hack him? How do I break into his Facebook account or whatever else I want to do? Well, it's unlikely that I'll be able to. I probably can't. So instead of attacking him, why don't I attack the services around him? Those are probably less secure than he is. All right, so what services does Robert use? Well, we already know he's on Facebook, right? And that's what I want to get into in the first place. So let's learn a little bit about Facebook. So we can browse to facebook.com. And in the URL, what do we see? We see it directs us to index.php. I know what you're thinking. It's pronounced fup. It's not. I looked it up. It's PHP. So PHP, as most of you know, is a back-end scripting language. Really common. It's just continuously growing. Lots of frameworks built on top of it, Cake PHP, Gohana, CodeIgniter, things like that. Now, the interesting thing about PHP is it has session management built in. And it has essentially one piece of session management code that everybody uses. When you create a session, you are essentially creating a random identifier that's stored in your cookie. And that cookie is what tells Facebook or whatever website you're going to, hey, this is the same data or this is the same user, for example. So Robert may go and log in to facebook.com with his username and password. Facebook will produce some sort of random session identifier, send it to him, store it in a cookie, and every time he goes back, it'll say, his browser will send that cookie, and Facebook will say, oh, I recognize this identifier. This is Robert, so I will allow him to access this Farmville page because I do know it's him. So why don't we understand this session identifier a little bit more? If we can't get his, maybe we can produce it somehow. Well, PHP is awesome because it's open source. While the Facebook source is not, we can look at PHP, the underlying code of Facebook and many, many other sites. And what we can see here is how that session identifier, that random ID that protects you on Facebook, protects you on your bank, protects you anywhere that you create a session, where you log in with some sort of authentication mechanism, how that protects you, right? How random is that identifier? So we can actually look right here in session.c from PHP. And what it does is it takes a couple things. It takes your IP address, the IP address of the person logging in. It takes the time that they created that cookie, the epoch. It takes the microsecond that they created that cookie, as well as a random value. In total, it's 160 bits of data, which actually isn't that much data. It's 20 bytes. Once it's hashed, it's also 160 bits, assuming they're using the SHA-1 hash, which PHP supports. So the question is, how big is 160 bits or 20 bytes? It doesn't seem like that long, 20 bytes. I mean, that's virtually the length of my name. Well, let's understand a bit. We don't deal with bits too much in the web. We have, 64 bits really twice as much as 32 bits? Is it twice as many values? I don't understand. Well, what we can do is we can, if we can remember these two things, these two tips, it's great for determining how many types of values or how many values are in a certain number of bits. So for example, if we can remember 0 bits through 9 bits, if we know that 0 bits is one value, the value is 0, where 2 bits is 4 possible values. You have 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, and 0, 1. 0 through 9, just remember 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 56, 5, 12. And you can also remember, for every 10 bits, you can add approximately 3 zeros. So let's say we have 10 bits, right? It starts with 0, which is a value of 1, right? There's only one possible value. So we start with 1 and add 3 zeros for 10 bits. For something like 20 bits, that's a 0 again. So we start our number off with 1, and then 10 bits and 10 bits, 3 zeros and 3 zeros. It's approximately a million possible values in 20 bits. 25 bits, again, 5 is approximately 32. And again, 6 zeros for the 20 bits. So 160 bits, how big is that? Maybe I can just brute force his cookie. So it's a lot. 160 bits is a lot. Let's assume I had access to, a very powerful supercomputer, like my MacBook Pro. And I could brute force 100 trillion values per second. It would take over 900 quadrillion eons to brute force 160 bits. I don't even know how long an eon is. I have to look it up. So that's not going to happen. We're not going to brute force his cookie or his identifier. So let's take a look at this again. All right, IP address, epoch, microseconds. Wait a second, microseconds. Isn't there only a million microseconds in a second? So a million, if we recall, is actually approximately 20 bits, not 32. So we're actually not dealing with 160 bits total. We can actually reduce that microseconds to 20 bits. Right? We know it's going to be between 0 and 999,999, a million possible values of microseconds. So we reduce, without doing any work, because I'm lazy, 12 bits. All right, 148 bits is still a big value. Right? There are a lot of possible values. Well, what else can we do to reduce this? Okay, well, we're on Facebook. And what does Facebook have? Chat. I love to chat. So if you've logged into Facebook, you've probably seen the chat on the bottom right corner. What happens is, if you pop it up, you can see all your friends who are online, offline, away, whatever. And what's happening in the background is AJAX. The Facebook page or your browser is constantly making requests to Facebook and say, hey, is anyone new online, offline, etc. What if I watch for Robert to come online? If he is to go to facebook.com and log in, that's as soon as he will pop up in the chat. Now the problem is Facebook only does this every few seconds. So I'm not going to know exactly the second that he actually comes online. But what if I make these requests myself? And every single second, I just hit Facebook and I say, is anyone new online? Is anyone new online? Is anyone new online? Until one of those seconds, it says, oh yeah, Robert just logged in. Now I know the exact second that Robert logged in, which, if you recall, is actually part of that cookie, right? That epoch, that time that he logged in is 32 bits of that data. But wait, Sammy, what if the time isn't the same between Facebook and your computer? Because it's really Facebook's time, not my computer's time. Well, luckily I'm using an Apple, so it's extremely accurate time. I mean, we just know this. But the problem is Facebook might not be so accurate, so there still may be some drift there. However, most web servers will actually include the local time of the web server in the response. So in the HTTP response, it will say, this is the current date of this response. And now you have the local server time, the exact epoch that he logged in. So we just reduced another 32 bits. All right, so we went from 160 bits down to 116. Still a lot of possible values. What else can we do? All right, I love to chat. So why don't I just chat him? And I'll send him a link, not even a malicious link. Again, he's not susceptible to malicious links. He's probably running, let's say, something like Firefox with no script. He probably has JavaScript entirely disabled even. So if I send him a malicious link, I won't be able to do much. So I'll send him nothing malicious at all. I'll just send him my blog. And when he hits my blog, I'll acquire his IP address. Again, another 32 bits. But Sammy, he's smart. He's probably on a proxy. He's probably using Tor. Well, if he doesn't trust my site, he probably doesn't trust Facebook as well. So he's probably using that same proxy or using Tor on Facebook as well as my site. What's that mean? I see the same public IP address that Facebook sees when he creates that cookie, which means I get the same exact data. I get the data that I need, even though it may not be his actual public IP address. Again, we just reduced another 32 bits. So we went from 160 bits of randomness down to 84 bits. All right, so we acquired the IP address, we acquired the epoch, and we reduced microseconds. What's this LCG value, or this PRNG? Well, a PRNG is a pseudo-random number generator. And LCG is a type of PRNG. It's called linear congruential generator. They're really well understood. They've been around longer than I've been alive, at least 25 years now. And it's essentially a very simple random number generator. So what happens is whenever you call rand in PHP, the rand function, you get a random number, it's calling this LCG. Now, because it's so well understood, we could say, well, maybe we can reverse those numbers. If we just get enough random numbers, we can actually reverse and figure out what the random number before was going to be. The problem is PHP uses something called the combined LCG, where they have two random number generators, and whenever you pull a random value out, it pulls two random values and then XORs them together. So we're probably not going to be able to reverse that. That's going to be tough. Now, PRNGs do something interesting. They always require a seed. The seed is basically the random value or the random data that produces all the pseudo-random data afterwards. So if you can ever determine what the seed is for a PRNG, you will know exactly what the random number is every time you hit rand from then on, always, with 100% accuracy. So let's take a look at PHP's seed. Now, if we take a look, PHP, when you run rand, it only ever seeds once in the beginning. And that's actually the right way to seed a PRNG. Once you get that random data, from then on, it never seeds it again. Well, that seed does two things. It creates a 64-bit seed split into two values, S1 and S2, or seed 1 and seed 2. Each are 32-bit values. Let's take a look at those. We won't go too deep into the math here, but this is seed 1. Basically what it does is it takes the epoch, basically the second that PHP started up, or your Apache or whatever web server, XORed to the ones complement of the microsecond that that service started up. Forget about the ones complement for a moment. Let's just assume it's seconds XORed with microseconds. Okay, what's that even mean? It's basically the time that PHP started up and then mixed with the microsecond that it started up, just to make it really hard to guess. So I might know, let's say, what month the process started up. But at that point, it would get overwritten with the microseconds, except it doesn't. The problem is, if we recall, microseconds is only 20 bits long, not 32 bits. So that microseconds only mixes the least significant bits of this value, of the time. And I can guess the most significant 12 bits, the other 12 bits of the 32. Basically, if you need more information on this, come see me. But basically what we can do is, as long as we can guess within a 12-day period of when that process started, we can guess those 12 bits. And you're saying, all right, well, how are you going to guess within a 12-day period of when the process started? Well, a lot of servers, what you can do is you can just make it a keep alive connection and then send 20,000 requests. And what happens after a certain number of requests with most web servers? They'll respawn the process. And now you have a brand new process with a brand new seed, and now you know within a 12-day window when that process started. So we just reduced that 64-bit seed down to 52. So what else can we do? Well, what's the other 32 bits? The other 32 bits is based off of a very complex algorithmic function. It's called the process ID. Oh, wait a second. So that's 32 bits. The process ID itself is only 15 bits. On any Linux system, by default, the process ID is only 15 bits. So without doing any work, again, you just reduce another 17 bits. Even better, you can typically get the process ID. How can you get that? You can get it from an Apache server info page, very common among web servers. You can get it from a PHP info page. You already know it's running PHP. If you have more access, if you hack the server somehow, maybe you can execute PHP and you can run the getMyPID function. You could, if you can do local commands, you could run the Linux command ps. More likely, you're going to be able to hit an Apache server info page and get the process ID from there. At which point, you reduce that 32 bits of that seed to 0. So now, all you're left with for the full seed is the 20 bits of when it started up. Okay, so we reduced all of this, reduced IP address, epoch, microseconds, and that random value down to a total of 40 bits. Something I can actually brute force. But wait, there's more. What if we split those up? Okay, so there's the PRNG, the 20 bits from the PRNG, and there's the 20 bits from the cookie. What if we calculated the PRNG separately, and we calculated that 20 bits independently? We can actually do that within a few seconds. 20 bits is only approximately a million. So within a few seconds, with some code that I've written, we can actually reduce the PRNG and figure out the initial seed. And what that means is we can determine every single random number that will ever come out of it. At that point, if we can calculate that independently and then calculate the other 20 bits, you're not actually doing 40 bits of work. You're actually doing 21 bits of work, because each bit only doubles the amount of work. So as long as you're doing those two independently, that's kind of like a meet in the middle attack. It's actually a lot less work. Another thing is, what if you do solve the PRNG, right, with that 20 bits? What else can you do? Have you ever been to a website and you forgot your password? So you put in your username or email address, and it emails the original email address on file for that account. And it says, hey, hit this random link to reset your password. Well, what if you went to that website and you said, oh, I'm the administrator, and you put in administrator, and it emails the admin, not you, but the admin, a random URL. Well, you know what every random value is going to be. So you can predict that random value, go to that URL, reset the administrator's password, log in, and then reset their email address so they can't even reset their password. So you can do a lot of attacks with this. So at this point, we're at 20 bits of possible values for cookies. So 1 million possible cookies. And on average, that means 500,000 cookies in order to break into this account. Awesome. We can do this within a few hours. So how do we fix this? I've notified PHP of this a while ago, and they fixed it pretty promptly. They've added more entropy. There's some other stuff we can do. Create your own session values if you want to be very secure. You could read something like dev-urandom on Linux. The attack is difficult to execute, right? There are certain things that we need to acquire. Some are hard to get, some are not, depending on the type of site you're on, like the time the person got their cookie. Another thing, Facebook is not vulnerable. The reason I use Facebook as an example is because I don't want to go to jail. And Facebook today actually uses something called hip-hop. They basically took PHP, and they have so many hits, obviously, and so much traffic that they've actually taken that PHP and they essentially compile it into, or they convert it to C++ and then compile it in execute bytecode, just so that Facebook's a lot faster. In this, they've actually used different types of sessions that makes this attack not feasible. Many other websites are exploitable to this, as well as just the PRNG. Just breaking the PRNG is bad enough, and you can figure out random values for CAPTCHAs, for the administrator trick, or the forgot my password trick. So at this point, this is awesome. I've broken into his account, right? Now I can log in as Robert. Oh, this is going to be fun. So at this point, I'm going to email his girlfriend, Anna, as Robert, and I can say whatever I want, right? She trusts him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have her hit a malicious link so I can penetrate her network, obviously. So let's learn about networks. This is your network. This is your network on drugs. This is actually most of your networks, I'm assuming. So why are we learning about networks? Let's take a quick look at a NAT. A NAT is basically something that allows you to share a public IP address among multiple network devices behind it. I heard this rumor the other day, we're running out of IP addresses. Has anyone else heard this? I don't know if it's true. NAT essentially extends that, right? Now, if you have 3 network devices in your network, you don't need a public IP address for all of them. You can have a single IP on your public NAT, and behind you can have your private IP address space, and they'll all share that public IP address. The NAT does something else, which is pretty cool. It actually protects your systems. It protects the devices behind. By default, it won't allow inbound connections. Now, if I were running a system, a PC on a public IP address, anyone could try to attack my system, right? They could try to hit it with just hit any port, right? Find out any services that I'm running that I don't even know I'm running. If I were running Sentinel from 1984, they just exploit it. If I were running SSH, they could brute force my username and passwords. A NAT will prevent any inbound connections unless explicitly told, right? Unless you say, I want a port forward, I want a DMZ. So a NAT also protects your internal systems. And you can sort of feel safe, like, all right, I'm at home, I'm on my NAT, no one can hit the services that I'm running. We're going to take a quick detour and talk about cross-protocol scripting. Cross-protocol scripting is pretty cool. It's basically a way to trick the browser into how it's communicating, or the protocol that it's communicating on. So HTTP is a new line-based protocol. What does that mean? It means that we communicate entirely, whenever you send a request, you send, let's say, your HTTP header, and each part of the header is separated by a new line, or CRLF, actually. So you'll send, get/HTTP 1.0 new line, user agent, whatever, new line. Where a fixed byte protocol like TCP or IP, you'll say, well, the source port is always these 16 bits. The destination port is always these 16 bits. A new line means nothing. Now, HTTP is not the only new line-based protocol. There are other protocols out there that are new line-based. So IRC, Internet Relay Chat. I just love to chat. What you can do with IRC is that it's also a new line-based protocol. The way it works is you connect to a server. Let's say you talent to it. And you send, you say, hey, I am this username, and this is new line. This is my nickname, new line. And it will send some data back and forth. You might have to respond to a ping request, and you'll join a channel, new line, and then send a message. So this is interesting. What if I got your browser to do this? What if I got your browser to make that connection to the IRC server? I wrote the code. I wrote the HTML and JavaScript that's required for this, and your browser connects. And you're saying, well, how would that happen? Because the browser doesn't understand the IRC protocol. It would never communicate this data. And also, it would send an HTTP request, right? It would just send an HTTP, and the IRC server would have no idea what you're talking about. Well, have you ever connected to an IRC server and sent an invalid command? What happens is it errors. It says, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what that command is. But the IRC is a new line-based protocol. So what if you connect and you send, let's say you make a web page, and it contains an HTTP form. At that point, that form says, I'm going to post to this IRC server on port 6667. We'll say it's HTTP, but it's really an IRC server. Then you automatically submit that form via JavaScript. The browser will connect to that IRC server on port 667 and say, hey, I want to post to slash, right? It'll say post slash HTTP 1.0, new line. The IRC server will say, I have no idea what post means. I'm ignoring that. Then you'll say user agent, right? Your browser sends user agent. Chrome says, don't know what that means. Then it says cookies, says, don't know what that means. And then it gets to the post data. How's the post data defined? Who defines the post data? Well, the web page, right? Either the user or the web page. So what if that post data is hidden on the page? Let's say in a hidden element. And what if that post data happens to be user? And what if that post data happens to contain nick and join and private message? You can then get that user to actually connect to that IRC server from their IP address, not your IP address, not the server IP address, but the client's IP address, connect to the server, join an IRC channel, and then harass it. All right, awesome. So we can, let's say we have a malicious server. That's supposed to say HP, actually. It's a mistake, my bad. So we have this malicious server that we can actually host this code on. And as long as we're hosting this code, it's not our server that connects to the IRC server. It's the client. It's the web browser. So what would that look like? Essentially, we'd see something like this. The web browser connects to the malicious server. It downloads the HTML or JavaScript, and it executes it. It connects to the IRC server on port 6667. The browser thinks it's HTTP connection. It sends the standard post request until it gets to the post data. The IRC server has no idea what any of this stuff is. It's ignoring every single line until it gets down to the post data. It says, oh, I understand what user means. I understand what nick means. And it executes that code. It's very easy to do. I mean, here's the code. So that's pretty cool. Now, harassing IRC channels, that's not that interesting. What about SMTP? What about mail servers? Port 25. What if you did this for a mail server? So you connected to a mail server, and you said, all right, it sends the post request, but then it sends hello. The mail server says, I don't know what post means, I don't know what user agent means, I don't know what cookies means, etc., until it reaches the post data. And it gets to the post data and says, oh, I know what hello means. I know what mail from means. I know what recipient means. I know what subject Viagra means. And you just start spamming, right? What if you have a high traffic website? Well, let's say 1,000 visitors a day with unique IP addresses. You can just you can spam from every unique IP address, and it doesn't even point back to you. It's these thousands of visitors that are spamming for you. Think about how hard that would be to block. Now, again, this is not interesting to us, right? Spamming, not a big deal. We have better things to do. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about NAT pinning. All right, so what is NAT pinning? So NAT pinning, where cross-protocol scripting confuses the browser, NAT pinning confuses the browser as well as the router. Now, we understand that we can connect to the IRC server and send false IRC commands. Well, do you guys remember, let's say, 5 years ago when you would connect to an FTP server and you try to download a file and it wouldn't work? Or maybe you'd upload a file and it wouldn't work, right? You'd connect to the server, you'd see the files there, but why wouldn't it download? That was back when we had earlier implementations of NAT. You'd connect to the FTP server on port 21 and you'd say, hey, I want to download whatever file. And the way FTP works is it'll say, hey, connect back to me on port 12345 and send me this data. But if you recall, the NAT will block that because the NAT says, no way I'm letting any incoming inbound connection come through my NAT. Right? A, it doesn't know who to send it to, and B, it's just built to not allow inbound connections unless told. The problem is this caused a lot of issues for users, right? This is bad user experience. So the router manufacturer said, you know what? All right, we're going to get smart. We're going to implement code, some connection tracking code, and we're going to monitor FTP connections. So if I ever see an FTP connection now as a router going out from my trusted internal private people, and I see them trying to access a file and they say, hey, connect back to me on port 12345, they're going to open up port 12345 on the NAT and send it back to the client who did that request. Okay. The same thing happened with IRC. IRC has something called DCC for direct connections. And you can DCC send a file or a chat to somebody. You want to say, hey, I want to connect to you directly. I don't want this data to go over the server. connect back to me on port 12345. Again, it wouldn't work with earlier NAT implementations. The router vendors got smart and said, all right, we're going to watch port 6667. If we ever see any outbound connections from our internal person on 6667, and then they try to establish a DCC connection, we're going to port forward that port back in, because we obviously trust this user. This is our internal person, right? It's not someone from the outside doing this. But what if you visit my webpage, right? You're an internal user on a web browser, and you visit my malicious website. And my malicious website has HTML on there connecting out to a form, right? It's a form that connects to an IRC server on port 667. So now your browser connects to port 6667 on some other server, and in that post data is this DCC message. What happens? That DCC message goes out to that IRC server, and the router sees it go through port 667 and think, oh wow, this was an IRC connection. I better open up port 12345. What if I change that port from 12345 to 22? And what if I added a couple more DCCs in there, right? You can have as much data as you want in that post. So instead of just 22, I also had 21 and 23, 25, 80, 443, 1024, and about 65,530 other ports. Your router would port forward every single port back to the client without them even knowing, just by visiting a web page. You just opened up your entire system to public attack. Anyone can do anything. So if you're running SendMail from 1984, it's done, right? You're toast. You thought you were secure because you're behind your NAT or your firewall. It doesn't matter. The connection tracking just opens this up, just trying to make things, nice for you. I mean, it's easy. This is it. That's all you have to do. So what happens now? Well, some of the browser vendors got smart and they said, you know what? We shouldn't allow people to harass IRC channels. This has nothing to do with the NAT pinning. This is back for the cross-protocol scripting. People were using this to abuse IRC. And the browser said, poor IRC channels. We don't want them to get harassed. So we're going to block ports. We're going to block port 6667. There's no reason a browser should connect to port 6667. So how do we get around this? Well, what we can actually do is we're dealing with TCP in this case, right? TCP is a fixed byte protocol. The source port is always going to be 16 bits. So what if you created a form and you created a port? You say, I want to connect to HTTP hostname port 72,203. Well, that's larger than 16 bits. So what's the browser do? The browser says, all right, well, is 72,203 equal to 6667? Oh, it's not? All right, I'll let it through. Until that connection gets to the TCP/IP stack. And what happens there? TCP/IP stack says, oh, this is a short. This is 16 bits. What? You're trying to send me 17 bits? I don't think so. I'm going to truncate that. So it truncates that additional bit. And what are you left with? A 16-bit value that equals 6667. And now you've just evaded the browser security. I did not come up with this. This was actually found by the respectable security group, Goatsy Security. So thanks to them for that. So this is awesome. I mean, this is incredible. I can just open up anyone's ports. All they have to do is visit my website. From here, Anna visits my website because Robert sent her that message with that malicious URL. And once that happens, I now scan her. And what do I find? She's running Apache. The journal, right? Her personal journal. What's she writing about? Twilight. I love Twilight. I mean, she's the Team Jacob fan. I'm more of a Team Edward kind of guy. But now I have the information to woo her. I know it. So I'm ready to meet her. All right, but before we do this, how do we protect against NAT pinning? A couple things. There's no one answer, right? You want to do as much as you can. Have a strict firewall if you can. Prevent outbound connections. If you don't have any teenagers at home, there's no reason to have port 6667 allowed out, okay? Client-side stuff. Make sure you're running an up-to-date browser, which is kind of a double-edged sword. You're like, all right, well, they fixed all these great things, and then they add all these new features and new bugs. That's sort of up to you. If you're using Firefox, use NoScript. There are probably other plugins, as well as privacy plugins that are beneficial. Client side, you can run a local firewall. I run Little Snitch on my Mac, and what it'll do is it'll say, hey, your Chrome is trying to connect to a port that I don't recognize. Do you want to allow this out? So all of these are just some methods that you can help prevent this kind of thing. Now at this point, I'm ready to meet Anna. I have the information. I can just set essentially a date up as Robert, right? So I log in as Robert again. I say, hey Anna, I want you to meet this guy Sammy. He's awesome. In fact, he's going to come over and meet you tonight. Now, the thing is, I can't just ask for her address, right? Because obviously Robert would know the address. He's her boyfriend, so that would just not make sense. So I have to figure out where she's located. So how are we going to do this? All right, let's see here. The moment you've all been waiting for. Triple X SS. Yeah. We're going to do geolocation via triple XSS. What does that even mean? Anna's going to visit a malicious site, right? We're going to send her to another malicious site. When she visits that malicious site, triple XSS is going to scan her local network, and we're going to find out exactly the type of router she uses. All right, well, how are we going to do that? There are a million ways to do it, better ways than this, but this is a simple way. We can just load iframes on the page, entirely hidden. The iframes will hit URLs that we know for existing routers. For example, Belkins often have a setup URL where you can actually configure the router on 192.168.2.1/setup.cgi. Even if another router is using that IP address, it doesn't matter because we're hitting the specific CGI or whatever exact URL where we expect the setup screen to be. The onload will execute only if that's hit properly and if that loads. So we can do iframes for every common router. From there, that onload will execute for the type of router that she's using. Once that happens, we can load XSS on the router. You're probably thinking, okay, well, how many routers have XSS on them? All of them. Basically, if it has a web interface, it has XSS. And this goes back to the router vendors thinking, okay, well, the router's behind your network, or the router's protected, right? You're probably running WPA2 Enterprise, of course, and the router's inside your home. So unless someone unless they know your WPA2 password, they're not going to be on your network, right? Or if they're actually inside your house, in which case you're already owned. So they think, all right, who's going to XSS? Well, it doesn't matter because you're running a browser. You will execute my code when you visit my site. So I can write the code that will attack your internal network. As long as you visit my site, you will execute that. That's why XSS is bad, even on an internal network. So you load the appropriate XSS based off the router. And from there, what do? Well, that loads remote malicious JavaScript from my server. I have a lot of malicious URLs for some reason. And once it loads that JavaScript, what does that JavaScript do? Well, it runs Ajax locally on the router. And what does that do? That then hits the local status info page of the router, where you typically have LAN IP address, WAN IP address, router MAC address. And then it sends that back to me, specifically the router MAC address. All right, so why is it sending the router MAC address to me? Well, obviously, if we want to look something up, we just Bing it, right? So open up your browser, type www.bing.com. Once the search box loads, type in Google. And hit enter. Okay, but why Google? Oh yeah, because they know everything. Have you seen this? It's a Street View car. There's only one. Drives around, takes pictures. It's pretty interesting. But it does a couple other things. Now, recently, have you guys heard of this huge Google case where they've been storing all this unencrypted data and everyone's freaking out? Europe's like, you can't do that. So Google's like, okay, we'll delete it. Sorry. America's like, you can't do that. That's illegal. You can't store that data. Google's like, all right, we'll delete it. America's like, no, you can't delete that. That's illegal. It's like, what? So they can't store it or delete it. So now they're in this limbo in America. But anyway, that unencrypted traffic would never affect any of us, right? We all have encrypted networks at home. So they're not storing any of our data. They're storing, regular users out there who never bothered to encrypt their routers. So we're not going to talk about that because Anna probably has an encrypted router. So what else are they doing? Well, while these cars are driving around, they're taking pictures, they're calculating GPS coordinates, and they're storing it. They're correlating that so that they know where to place the actual pictures on the maps. And it's an awesome feature. They're doing something else. They're also looking for Wi-Fi networks. So they're driving around, they say, oh, we're taking a picture on this street, calculating the GPS coordinate of where this picture is taken. Oh, and look at that. There's a Wi-Fi network called Linksys. And what else do they see? They see the MAC address of that router. The MAC address of that Linksys router. Doesn't matter if it's encrypted or not, because that's in the 802.11 header, entirely unencrypted. It's only the IP level traffic that's encrypted with WPA or WEP. So they're now correlating that MAC address to the GPS. So you're thinking, okay, well, don't worry, Sam, I have an Apple router at home. It's very strong. It broadcasts across streets and streets. They'll never figure out where I am. But what about the signal strength? As they're driving along, they see signal strength getting stronger and stronger, right? Until it hits a peak. They say 10%. Oh, Linksys, 10%, 30%, 50%, and it peaks. It peaks at that point. And then it starts going down, 40%, 30%. So now they know, let's say east to west, exactly where your router is. Of course, it could be blocks north or blocks south. You have no idea until they make a left turn, right? And you see that strength. It either gets stronger or weaker. And based off that, you can do some basic triangulation to approximately figure out where that router is. So how do we access this data? Well, HTML5 has this new feature called geolocation. Really cool thing. So what will happen is, if I have some HTML5 geolocation HTML, essentially, or JavaScript on my page, you'll visit my page, and your browser, assuming it supports this feature of HTML5, it'll say, do you want to share your location with this website? Most of us would say no. I was curious what would happen, so I said yes. And I monitored what that connection did. And Firefox and Chrome support this so far. What happens is your browser, assuming you shared your location, you said, yes, I will share my location, it then sends the MAC address of your router, of your gateway, to Google on an HTTPS connection in this JSON request. And what does Google send back? It sends back coordinates. So what if I put this HTML on the page that Anna's going to visit? Then I can get her exact location. Well, wait a second. Why would she ever share location, right? She's supposedly looking at a Twitter page or something like that. She's not going to share her location with this website. She's probably never even seen that pop-up before. But wait a second. If this JSON request just includes that MAC address, well, can't I get that myself? Can't the XXXSS scan her local network, find out the type of router she's using, based off the type of router, load the appropriate XSS, load that XSS on the page, pull in remote malicious JavaScript onto the page that does an AJAX request for the status info page, acquires the router MAC address, sends it to me, and then I can produce this JSON request myself on behalf of her? I put in her MAC address in here, I send the request myself to Google, and what do I get back? Jack Bauer level triangulation. That's Jack Bauer on Google Maps right now, looking her up. This is extremely accurate geolocation that Google is providing. Extremely accurate. Just to see how accurate, this is an actual exploitation of it. I took the coordinates that I got, and I did driving directions to the address, because I knew the address of where this router was. Driving directions, 30 feet. I looked over at the router. It was 30 feet away. It was creepy how accurate this was. Extremely accurate. I mean, it's scary. So you're thinking, okay, Sammy, thank you so much for telling us this. I'm going to go home, throw out my router, and buy an Apple router, which doesn't have a web interface, by the way. So it's not exploitable with this method. But it doesn't matter because of this. Anyone know what this is? It's an Android phone. You probably have one. So you go home, really happy because you have this new Apple router in your hand that you're about to install, and you rip out your Linksys, throw it away. You plug in this Apple router, and you're happy. And then your Android phone looks around and says, oh, wow, look, a new network. Well, the Android phone has some pretty cool technology on it, such as GPS and Wi-Fi. So what's it do? It says, oh, wow, there's this new network called Apple. And this is the MAC address. And these are the GPS coordinates. And oh, wow, the strength it's very close. And it sends it back up to the mothership. She's thinking, oh, man, so glad Sammy told me this. I'm going to throw out my Android phone and be smart and get an Apple phone, right? iPhone 4, here I come. But it doesn't matter because it's not your Android phone. What about your neighbor's? Right? This data is not even encrypted. It doesn't matter whether you're using encryption on your router. Your neighbor with their Android phone comes along, sees the Apple network, takes that MAC address, takes that signal strength, sends it back up. Right? The person walking down the street with their dog, just everywhere. everywhere this data is getting collected into this publicly accessible database that's not actually really documented, but you can access. Now, normally, I have a slide that says, how do you prevent this? In this case, I don't. I'm sorry. So, to conclude, I'm sorry to say it, but privacy is dead. Thanks for coming, everyone. I have a few minutes for questions. Okay. Any questions?
What is the acronym XXS?
I can't tell you that. Oh, man. Also, all the code is available online. These are not malicious URLs, by the way.
I think a couple of us were wondering if the second picture on the left, I'm not sure what that was, a man or a woman, but that was Arsenic's second picture.
No. Arsenic's got skills. Arsenic's got skills.
So you and law enforcement are, good now?
We're good now, yeah. Like this. That's the ankle bracelet, by the way. Yeah, exactly.
Any more questions?
All right. I'll talk to you after. Cool. All right, thanks.
Very interesting.
Thank you.